Hi, everyone. If you're one of the keeners and you're a little early, we do this on purpose so we can say hi to you. Showed up a few minutes early, and so we can get some of your questions in the chat. So if you're here, say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're from. We'd love to know. We have a quick 30-minute webinar with Kyla today, but it's going to be full of insights, and we'd love to hear what you want to learn today. So throw your questions in the chat. If you're just showing up, welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. And hello again, everyone. I'm going to repeat this message just because if you showed up early, we sort of like to go live a few minutes early to get your questions. And if you have any questions for Kyla today, feel free to throw those in the chat. Also, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Say hi. Throw in your questions, topics, anything you would like to learn today. We'll get started in about 30 to 40 seconds. Welcome, Joanna. We'll get started in about 30 seconds. Again, for those that are showing up a little early, the keeners that wanted to be here right when we started, say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're from. And also let us know what you want to learn today from Kyla. And again, welcome, friends. Throw your name in the chat. Say hi. Add your questions. We'd love to hear from you. We're just about to get started. Thank you for being here. And with that, I think we can begin. Hi, friends. Welcome to the webinar today. I'm Bobby Leahy, Chief Content Officer at commonsku. If you're new to commonsku, over 900 distributors powering 1.8 billion in network volume rely on commonsku's connected workflow. You can learn more by visiting us at commonsku.com. Remember to use the chat to ask your questions. We would love to hear from you. We want to know where you're from. We want to know what you want to learn today. So thanks for being here. And before we bring Kyla on camera, we have a quick poll for you. The poll we have is, how would you describe the current economy from your business perspective? Surprisingly strong, fragile but functional, confusing, contradictory, worse than it looks. How would you respond to this poll? Please vote, and we will show your results on screen here. Fragile but functional, confusing, and contradictory. Well, Kyla will be glad to know that we can talk about that, because that is right in her wheelhouse around how we feel about the economy and media and all those things. We'll talk about that today. What's your biggest challenge right now as a business leader? Is it navigating uncertainty? Is it supply chain pricing pressure? Is it adapting to AI and tech? Is it leading across generational differences? What would you say is your biggest challenge right now as a leader? Navigating uncertainty, of course. Well, we're going to cover all of that and more. Thanks again for being here. We're so glad you took time out of your busy day to spend time with us. Our guest today is Kyla Scanlon. Kyla is an economic commentator and creator who's reshaping how we understand money and markets. Kyla is the author of the bestseller In This Economy, and she coined the phrase vibecession to determine this gap between economic data and public sentiment. She's contributed to the New York Times, the Financial Times, New York Magazine, and Bloomberg, and has been profiled in the Wall Street Journal. Now, some of you might have heard Kyla speak at SKUCon to a packed house about the economy at the beginning of the year. So we're really delighted to have Kyla join us again. She's also going to be joining us at SKU Camp in the fall for a fall update. But for today, it's a great time mid-year to stop and have the conversation. Kyla, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet. You coined this term, vibecession, to describe this disconnect between how the economy feels and what the data shows. You've also talked about this idea of forever uncertainty, this economic limbo. And a lot of your work deals with perception versus reality. Why do you think this disconnect keeps widening with us?
In terms of data and sentiment?
Yes.
Yeah, so the word vibecession was actually coined almost 3 years ago now. And so it was describing a little bit of a different economy, but the main goal of that word was to talk about that disconnect between data and sentiment. So the way that people answered the poll, it's like, well, navigating uncertainty is the hardest thing to do as a business. And that makes a lot of sense because sometimes the data that we're used to talk about the economy oftentimes doesn't match how the economy feels, and it can make things feel even more uncertain. And so the whole idea of the vibe session was meant to capture that. Like we have
Yeah.
at that time, we had relatively strong economic data. We had a strongish labor market. Inflation was going down, GDP was going up, but people were feeling quite bad. And of course, that impacts their spending decisions, that impacts how they might move throughout the labor market. And so that's kind of one of the biggest problems we've been facing over the past couple of years is that economic data hasn't totally captured the reality
Yeah.
of most Americans.
Speaking of, Jerome Powell recently testified before Congress and reiterated the Fed's cautious stance on rate cuts, citing the uncertain effects of tariffs and inflation trends. How do you interpret this kind of messaging from the Fed, and how should we as businesses sort of respond to monetary policy signals?
Yeah, well, so what's going on right now is that fiscal policy is driving everything. So the decisions that the Trump administration is making is just impacting everything. Like the way that tariffs are moving, we're supposed to have some sort of decision on tariffs by July 9th, but Trump came out today and said that that July 9th date is not hard. It's not set in stone. And so if you're running a business, as I'm sure audience members are very aware, that makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
And just as it makes it difficult to run a business, it makes it difficult to run the Federal Reserve, who's the monetary policy body of the US. Is trying to decide, how is the US economy going to grow over the next year or so. And so for them, because these tariffs are creating so much uncertainty, like will they cause more inflation? Will they cause businesses to have to raise their prices? Will they cause businesses to let people go? The Fed can't really cut rates. And in fact, Jerome Powell said that if these tariffs weren't happening, they'd be able to cut rates because there'd just be a lot more certainty. And so that's a
Mm,
byproduct of fiscal policy in terms of just the decisions that the Trump administration is making
yeah.
based on how they feel about tariffs. But that's made it very difficult for both businesses and the Fed to move forward.
Yeah. You've called the economy kayfabe in your WWE, WWE economics piece. How much did
Yeah.
trade policy like tariffs is with performance, and what should like import heavy businesses watch for term in terms of long term impact? Because we have a lot of distributors that have a very import heavy business here.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's been quite difficult for everybody. One group that I'd recommend getting information from in terms of, what the decisions that the Trump administration might be making next and kind of the economic impact that could be happening is the Tax Foundation. They're a nonpartisan group and they do incredible work, gathering the various announcements that are made over the tariffs and how they might impact businesses and what the tariffs are actually going to be on. Like, is it going to be on steel and aluminum? Like, are we going to have higher tariffs on Canada and Mexico? And so they're kind of a good real-time policy update tool
Okay.
that people can use. But yeah, I mean, for right now, a lot of distributors, I'm sure people in the audience have done this. They've just stockpiled. So they've imported quite a bit
Yeah.
to try and get around some of this potential uncertainty. But
Yeah.
of course, the long-term impacts, as I'm sure people in the audience are painfully aware of, is that nobody knows what they're going to be, and therefore it's very difficult to determine pricing and strategy. But the Tax Foundation has a lot of very useful resources that I'd point people
Okay.
to kind of get a better picture of where things might be headed, just considering
Thank
the
yeah.
uncertainty. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. You've also written about how fear and manipulation sort of shape economic lessons and how media narratives like attention as infrastructure and narrative as capital drive this perception. In this last newsletter you wrote, especially, media coverage obviously influences our response to certainty, uncertainty. And when you say like this is more of a media trend, are we sort of stuck in this cycle of amplification and reaction? As business owners, we're trying to navigate decision making and it's so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, so what's tough about the media cycle is that they're businesses too. And so their
Yeah.
incentives are a little bit different, right? Like it's about eyeballs, it's about clicks, it's about advertising dollars. It's not their fault. They're just responding to the incentives in place.
Right.
But it can make it very difficult to sift through the noise. And I think for people to kind of parse through some of that stuff, I've talked to some business owners that have stopped checking the news. and instead check policy sources like Tax Foundation to get a better
Wow.
picture of stuff. Yeah, because it's just, if you check the news every day, especially right now, you're being yanked in a million different
Yeah.
directions. And if you're trying to run a business, like your job is running that business, like in trying to stay as focused as possible. And so sometimes going direct to source in terms of policy research can be more useful
Oh, that's very
versus like
helpful.
trying to follow headlines. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I'm going to jump to a question I had at the end about that. So I'm curious what economic signals you are watching right now that others might be missing, or what is it something that you daily sort of look at? Is it part of the organization you mentioned?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely watch the Tax Foundation. Erica York, if anybody uses Twitter, is a good follow on there. She does a lot of good research, a lot of quick hits on this stuff. If you don't have, I'm sure most people don't have time to read whole policy briefs, but she's a great person to listen to. But for me, my research is primarily around young people and like how they're
Hmm.
navigating the economy and sort of AI and how that might be impacting the job search for them. So I look a lot at like labor market data, trying to understand where that's heading.
Yeah.
So a little bit different than trying to plan for a business. Yeah.
Okay, and that fits right into our next topic because we're going to talk about AI and time horizons and value creation and all those kinds of things. You've written about the four phases of institutional behavior from panic to rebuild. And as AI now both disrupts and radically changes workflows and identity, what does it look like for organizations to rebuild with intention and not just react? And when I ask that question, I also want us to be aware that we're a SaaS company who's heavily invested in AI and we have lots of new innovation coming out with AI. So we also are a part of this big change that's coming forth. But how do we build more with intention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that a lot of people are thinking about AI is that it's a tool. And so it's important to understand the tools around you. Mary Daly, who's the president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve, her job is monetary policy, right? But she goes into those AI tools every day and understands, what they're doing and how she can leverage them. And so I think that's an important thing that most businesses are clearly doing. Like, how are these tools going to help us? How can we use it maybe as a complement rather than a replacement? And how can we move slowly and make sure that we're not outsourcing too much? One thing that I've seen, a company called Quora, which is like I believe a search company of sorts where people can like answer questions. It's Quora. They're actually hiring almost like an AI human assistant where a human will kind of comb through what the AIs are producing and like
Hmm.
make sure that it's a proper thing. Because sometimes the AIs can get a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of what they do and perhaps make some mistakes. Not saying that everyone's AI is doing that, but it does seem to be quite common. Um, so that seemed to be quite useful for a lot of people. Is kind of like pairing a human with an AI. And I
Yeah.
think that's the best place to start based on what I've read from people who know far more about AI than I do.
Yeah, we recently had a CEO summit with a lot of our enterprise customers, and a few of them already had in place a human AI consultant, if you will, on
Oh,
staff,
great.
full time
Yeah.
to sort of like help them. I thought it was a great idea, even for smaller businesses, to have someone,
Yeah.
on staff that's going to be not only monitoring what AI is producing, but also helping colleagues stay on trend and ahead of things because the tools are rolling out so fast.
Hmm.
Um, AI is redefining productivity. And since you write about this a lot, how should businesses think about value beyond dollars, especially when time and attention are becoming scarcer and more valuable when it comes to AI?
So I spend a lot of time writing about the attention economy. So my job is a lot of social media work, posting about the economy on Instagram and TikTok, etc. And so I try to understand what's going on in terms of what people are paying attention to and how attention ties into all of that.
Yeah.
It's been said a zillion times, but there is a lot of importance in terms of some sort of social media strategy, which I'm sure everybody already has. But attention is increasingly a scarce resource, and you're competing with the entire world for a second of people's time. And so I think that that's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is like how do you sort of market a message quickly, efficiently, and
Mm.
in line with like what algorithms desire. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but I think that's yeah.
Well, it leads to another question I had because you are also a creator, right? So you're a highly respected creator, and so there's all of fear and hype around AI. There's so much conversation, and from your perspective as a creator and an economic thinker, what's the most exciting shift that you see, and what should we be paying closer attention to from a creator perspective?
I mean, it's interesting. So what AI seems to what a lot of people are building AI for right now is to almost replace creative inputs. So how can we make movies and like, not use actors and things like that? And I find that to be an interesting case. I'm not sure if it would be the case that I would go after first. I think what I have found AI to be useful for and the people that I talk to the most is sort of like a research assistant. So if you have a big question about like some sort of trend in a market that you're trying to understand or some sort of distribution strategy, it can be a pretty useful thing to bounce ideas off of. And of course, there's the deep research tool with OpenAI that produces quite a bit of content in terms of trying to understand the nuances of something. And so I think what the chatbots are quite good for, based on my corner of the world and what I've been hearing, is kind of a gut check of sorts. So is this the right direction? Am I understanding this market correctly? Is this actually a trend worth paying attention to? So a research assistant seems to be a good use case for it.
I want to remind folks, if you have a question for Kyla, please throw it in the chat. Would love to hear from you and hear your questions. Also, I want to switch to just leading teams, especially with your topic around generations. There's often this generational divide in how people experience and interpret the economy. So, for example, someone who lived through 2008 might approach risk very differently than someone who came of age during the pandemic. Um, how can business owners better understand these differences and sort of lead our teams when we're made up of people with such varied economic reference points?
Yeah, it's a very weird time because it ties into what we were just talking about with AI, where one of the first use cases for AI is to automate a lot of entry-level jobs. And so you have a lot of young people that are graduating right now that are having a hard time finding work in the labor market. And in fact, the college wage premium, so the premium that you would earn based on having a college degree versus having no college degree, has decreased quite a bit too. And so you have these young people that are graduating into a world that isn't quite designed for them anymore,
Right.
and they don't really have a place to go. And these are some of like the best and brightest too. And so I think for companies that are looking for a lot of talent and are willing to like have some sort of AI human complement or just need like humans, there's a lot of really good people out there who need some sort of training. I think so. I graduated essentially into the pandemic with college. And so my first corporate experience was entirely online. And so that really shifted how I understood corporations. And when we were done with the pandemic, I needed like a retraining in terms of how
Right.
to actually be in the workforce. And I think that's one of the things that younger people need is just some retraining to understand how
Mm.
to interact in a corporation, which is something that we might have taken for granted
Oh, good
before the
point.
pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think that based on the conversation, so I've been traveling for like the past year with my book and I've talked to a lot of people about like how they feel about a lot of things, including college students and the people that hire them. And that seems to be the stickiest point, just based on anecdotal research, is like these students come into the organization and they don't know how to act. And it's like, well, have you considered training them like on what an organization is and like how to do corporate
Yeah.
things?
Yeah.
And so that's my biggest recommendation, just based on what I've been hearing and like what I've heard be successful in terms of what some companies are trying. And I think it's important just because, we did have 2 years of weirdness that was a long time ago now, but it still had a big impact on how these students went through college and their last years of high school.
Yeah. The whole idea where you have done such a brilliant job of bringing perspective to the economy and also helping us understand their fragmented perspectives. So I was leading a company in the 2008 recession, and we went
Mhm.
from, we were a small business. We went from 10 million down to 2 to 3 million, and we had to rebuild back up. So my narrative on the economy is different than someone else's narrative on the economy. Also, it was hyper regional to some degree. There were some regions that were doing better. There were industries that were doing better. We are in an industry that typically, believe it or not, actually can survive well in a recession because of the varied industries that we serve. As we look at economic data, you have now this generational perspective of people who have been through different experiences in the economy, and then you have kind of what's going on currently. As leaders, how do we encourage our team as we look forward to uncertainty in the economy?
So you encourage your teams to understand each other's perspectives?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I'm not sure. Like that's kind of the hard part about generational differences is like every generation has had a sticky point. Like millennials graduating into the Great Recession has set them back in terms of wage growth
Yeah,
substantially, right? And so for the Gen Zers, probably going to see something kind of similar happen just with AI and the impact that that's having on the labor market. But and so people are coming at their economic problems from quite different angles, right? Like the cost of living has gone up substantially over the past couple of years just because of pandemic era inflation, because of the housing crisis. And so it creates a different set of economic circumstances for young people that are just trying to enter the labor market and have solid footing.
yeah,
And so I think kind of understanding the economic problems that everybody might be facing. So for like a Gen Xer, the sandwich generation, oftentimes they're dealing with incredibly high childcare cost and incredibly high elder care cost. And so that's kind of an economic puzzle that they're trying to figure out. And then you
mm,
add on like student loan debt for the millennials, and that, again, that sort of wage erosion that happened because of the recession. You can kind of understand where people might be coming from in terms of their economic situation and what they might be asking for. But in terms of generational understanding, I don't really understand how to answer that question still.
yeah,
I get asked
sure.
it
It's a
quite a
broad
bit.
question too. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's quite difficult because
yeah,
a lot of it just boils down to like, oh, you just have to sort of have a conversation with each other and, understand that everybody does have different starting points, which I imagine most people already do. But it is something that seems to be very difficult for a lot of organizations is how do you convince people of your mission and your strategy, especially younger people who might not be so open to it.
mm,
And I haven't, to be totally honest, I haven't figured
no.
out a perfect answer for that.
I appreciate that honesty. One of the things I'm curious about is, when you spoke at SKUCon earlier in the year, we were having one type of economic conversation, which was around we're not even sure what's going to happen in the next 3, 4, 6 months, and now we're 6 months into the year. How's your confidence meter now yourself as you're looking toward the rest of the year, since you study so many economic signals and so many signals in the market? How are you feeling about the economy today? And is that a fair question, given that we just talked about vibe session and
Mhm.
reality versus how we feel?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about the economy. As everybody in the audience knows, uncertainty is expensive. Like it's the last thing that you want to deal
Mm,
with as a business owner, as a distributor. It's just not fun. And so uncertainty is kind of the primary commodity of the moment, and it doesn't seem like we're going to get a lot more clarity anytime soon, just based on how the administration is moving. And with the Fed not being able to cut because of these tariffs, like that makes it more difficult to see where the economy might be headed. Some of the Fed members are saying that we'll get cuts in July. I'm just not sure if that's possible. And then we do have some deteriorating labor market data, so it's tougher to get a job right now. There's a little bit less mobility between jobs. Inflation is staying relatively steady, but it's not going down as quickly as anybody would want it to. The economy's not really growing. Um, and so I think we're starting to see, like in the hard data, some evidence that the economy is entering some sort of contraction. And that I'm not sure if that'll translate into a recession. Like we're still far away from it, but the data is a little tepid at the moment.
yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the Q4 results that we just saw come
Mhm.
through.
Right.
I mean, Q1, I'm sorry, Q1 results. What's kind of interesting about our audience is that we have a lot of distributors who started their business during, like I know so many entrepreneurs who started their business during a recession. It sort of created this um, stay hungry mentality as they grew their business in a very tough time. Our customers on average grow 20% a year. So we've got a
Wow.
pretty progressive mindset with folks. But I have a mindset question, for all of us trying to do our best. And I know I keep asking this in different ways, but we're navigating economic noise,
Yeah.
shifting trade policy, tech disruption,
Right.
while trying to run a business. And so given that we have a pretty optimistic audience here, but they're also not Pollyanna, their head's not, in the clouds. They understand the reality. What kind of mindset can we adopt to stay grounded and make sort of smart long-term decisions? And one more comment inside the question, sorry, is that we also see businesses grow when they invest during these difficult times too. So it's an interesting balance. But what kind of mindset do you encourage the entrepreneurs and leaders here to adapt as they look forward to the rest of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things. Like the best time to invest is during a downturn because things do tend to be a little bit cheaper and money can be leveraged a little bit more. You can be a bit more nimble with it too. And so you do see a lot of businesses come out ahead, like marketing in some elements is like one of the strongest places to be in a recession. And I'm sure it's similar for the businesses here today. Um, so it really does come down to how nimble one can be, and I think that's a good mindset.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I won't um, meditate on that too much because I don't, again, know quite the right answer, and I wouldn't
Yeah,
proclaim
sure.
to. But I've heard that to be useful, and if it works for people here, that's amazing.
No, I think that's a great advice. The agility and staying nimble, I think, is huge advice for folks here. And a lot of us are running small businesses, and we have that ability to
Right.
adapt and do things. If we have any more questions, throw them in the chat. We have two more polls we're going to take before we leave here today. So we're curious what you think. Poll number 3. Um, After this conversation, kind of what's one area you feel more equipped to tackle? Is it making decisions in uncertainty? Is it understanding trade and tariff risks? Are you thinking differently about AI's impact? Is it communicating economic narratives with your team? What did you sort of walk away thinking, I need to invest a little more time and energy in doing this? One of those, pick A, B, C, or D. Thinking differently about AI's impact, 67%, maybe no surprise there. Okay, for our final poll, what mindset feels most helpful for you navigating this economy? Is it A, staying curious, B, embracing flexibility, C, focusing on long-term value, or D, filtering the noise? I'm a D person, but maybe I need to be more of a embracing flexibility. How about you? Filtering the noise. Thank you. That's so helpful. Kylie, you've done great work here because that is a big help. Thank you for sharing the resources that you did with us today. Thank you for spending time out of your schedule to help us, inspire us, and encourage us today. And we look forward to seeing you September in Scottsdale.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Good luck to everybody.
All right. Take care, Kyla.
Bye bye.